We're asked to show the argument if P then Q, if not P then Q, therefore Q is a valid deduction rule. The first step is to make a truth table containing all the lines of the argument. We have a column for P, a column for Q, a column for if P then Q, a column for not P, and a column for if not P then Q. And notice how I've labeled the two premises and the conclusion. Sometimes when trying to show whether an argument is a valid deduction rule, extra columns are added so that the last columns in the table are in the same order of the argument. Our text doesn't do that, but I will show that table at the end. The next step is to complete the truth table. The implication if P then Q is false only when the premise P is true and the conclusion Q is false. Otherwise, the implication is true. P is true and Q is false in row 2. The implication is false in row 2 and true in rows 1, 3, and 4. The column for if P then Q is true, false, true, true. Not P is false when P is true, and not P is true when P is false. The column for not P is false, false, true, true. And then finally we have the implication if not P then Q. This implication is false only when not P is true and Q is false. Otherwise, the implication is true. Not P is true and Q is false in row 4. The implication if not P then Q is false in row 4 and true in rows 1 through 3. The last column is true, 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 false. And now we need to find the rows in which the premises are true and then see if the conclusion is also true. If the conclusion is true when all premises are true, we have a valid deduction rule. If the conclusion is not always true when all premises are true, we do not have a valid deduction rule. So again, analyzing the two columns of the premises, notice both are true in row 1 as well as row 3. And in these two rows, notice how the conclusion of Q is also true, which indicates we have a valid deduction rule. So again, both if P then Q and if not P then Q are true in rows 1 and 3. In these rows, Q is also true, and therefore we have a valid deduction rule. And again, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you'll see the truth table with some extra columns. As you see here below, notice the last 3 columns here are in the same order of the argument. This is nice because it makes the table easier to read. Notice how we can see in the last 3 columns, the two premises and the conclusion are true in row 1 as well as row 3. However, it does make a bigger table because here we included the column for Q twice. I hope you found this helpful.